This is the Literary Atlanta podcast. I'm Allison Law. This is the second time you're hearing from me this week. I hope everyone liked our last episode featuring historian Joseph Crespino and his new book, Atticus Finch. Because we have an embarrassment of riches in the new books and book events department, we're pleased to bring you this episode featuring another Atlanta author with a new breakout book and a launch party that's happening tomorrow, Saturday, May 12th, in Decatur. If you have young people in your life, you're going to want to know about a new middle grades book called Amal Unbound. My conversation with the book's author, Aisha Saeed, is next on episode 39 of Literary Atlanta. Atlanta is a book town, home to avid readers and host to some of the finest writers and storytellers on the planet. That's my thesis statement, and this podcast provides the supporting details through behind-the-scenes anecdotes, author interviews, and all of the ways that you can experience the rich literary landscape right here in Literary Atlanta. Aisha Saeed is the author of the young adult book Written in the Stars, which was listed as a best book of 2015 by Bank Street Books. Written in the Stars was also a 2016 YALSA Quick Pick for reluctant readers, and one of the top 10 books all young Georgians should read in 2016. Aisha's second book is a middle grade novel that went on sale this past Tuesday, May 8th. Amal Unbound has received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly and Kirkus and is a global read aloud for 2018. The protagonist of Amal Unbound is a Pakistani girl who loves school and aspires to become a teacher. But Amal's outspoken nature has devastating consequences when she unknowingly insults a member of the wealthiest family in her village. As we discuss in the following interview, Aisha is also a founding member of the nonprofit We Need Diverse Books. She's been featured on MTV, The Huffington Post, NBC, and the BBC, and her writings have appeared in publications including the journal Elan and the Orlando Sentinel. Aisha lives in Atlanta with her husband and 3 sons. Since her first book, Written in the Stars, was marketed as YA, and Amal Unbound is recommended for a younger audience, readers ages 10 and up, I asked her at what point in the writing process, if at all, she thinks about her readers. Does she write with a specific reader in mind?
So for Written in the Stars, I had Nyla in mind, who's the protagonist, and I knew what she looked like, but I thought she was an adult, actually. And I thought I was going to be writing a story about an adult, like not maybe a 20-year-old. Mm-hmm. But then as the story kept unfolding, her voice was just young. And so it became a young adult book. And with Amal Unbound, I began it as a young adult novel. My intention was for this to be a young adult novel. But as I wrote, it wasn't. The voice that was coming was just much younger. So I usually know the character I'm going to write about, but I've found that I'm often surprised by who they end up telling me how old they're going to be. And right. So the first draft of this was written as a young adult novel. And then I showed it to my editor, and I had talked to her. I was like, something doesn't feel right about it, but I can't figure out what it is. And so when she read it, she called me or emailed me, and she said, the reason it doesn't feel right is this is a middle grade novel. And then it just clicked. I'm like, you're right. She's just so young. The voice is young. Her perspective on how she's processing everything is young. And so then I had to go back. And then I did have to do some tweaking because the audience is very different for middle grade. Like this book is for 4th grade and up, and young adult is 14 and up. And so I had to just make sure it wasn't too violent, too graphic, and just so that it could be accessible to the audience that it was intended for.
Sure, I'm just always curious about that because some writers are hearken to the advice of write like no one's ever going to read this, but for me, as someone who's always thinking about the person who's going to be reading my words first in marketing or publicity, I always wonder if you have someone in mind that you're speaking to when you write.
Yeah, I think I'm speaking to my critique partners as I write. Emily XRPan is one of them, and the other is my friend Tracy Lopez, and they both read my work before anybody else reads it. And I think, I write for them first, and with their feedback in mind. Then my agent usually reads it. So after they give me feedback, I write for her, and then I write for my editor, and with each step.
And I can also imagine what it would have been like to read Amal's story at the age range that you're writing for, as someone 10 and up, to have learned about someone who never took education for granted because it wasn't a right. It was very much considered a privilege, and she knew how it was going to open doors for her and for the other people that she touches in this book. Did you feel that way when you were around, Amal's age or reading like that what it would have been like to see other worlds? So Amal is very bookish. She loves to read, and I loved to read as a kid. That was my escape, and I don't think I appreciated school as much as she did, because it was just something my parents sent me to every day, and I had to go, and I had no choice. But yeah, I was always dreaming about what was around the corner. I always was like, I remember when I was in second grade going, I have 10 more years before I graduate. And I was only 7, and I was already thinking about when will I be done and I can move on. And I also, just like Amal in the book, I wanted to be a teacher. And I was always, just like Amal does, I was always studying my teacher, saying, I'm not going to do that when I'm a teacher. I'm going to definitely do that when I'm a teacher. I was always taking mental notes. And so that part of her, I could definitely relate to, and wanting to see more of the world. And I definitely was always curious about what other places were like. My parents would take us every Saturday to the library when I was little. Actually didn't know bookstores existed when I was little. I thought it was just libraries. And I would always get books from other countries and other places, and just try to daydream about what it would be like to live there. So there's a lot of 10-year-old Amal that I see in myself. And I hope for the age that's marketed, even though Amal is in Pakistan, I think a lot of the things that she wants for herself are things that are very universal. So I hope they can see, oh wow, look, there's this child in Pakistan, and I feel the same way she does about many things. Maybe not school specifically, but many other things. Right.
Yeah.
Talking a little bit about the story, and I don't want to give too much away, but there is a wealthy family in this area, and Amal unknowingly insults a member of the family and becomes an indentured servant.
Yes.
How did you learn about indentured servitude?
That's a good question. I think it's something I've always known. It's something that's been addressed in a lot of Pakistani literature and in movies and in Pakistani dramas and books. So it's there's many, many articles about it. So I don't know exactly when the first time it came to my attention was, but I do know that it's something that's I've always thought about. When I lived in Gainesville, Florida, I went to University of Florida. There was a Chinese restaurant I remember that I loved to eat at, and I remember years later, I read an article that it had been raided because they were doing indentured servitude here in the United States in Gainesville, Florida. And so I think that was what sparked me researching about it. And then I learned that it was in Pakistan, and I got interested in just exploring what that would be like to live there and go through it. Yeah. But yeah, it happens everywhere, even here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Your book is also, you write a really beautiful author's note at the end of the story about Malala Yousafzai, who is probably one of the best known Pakistanis because of her story and her becoming the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner. Not the Pulitzer, the Nobel Peace Prize winner.
Maybe one day.
She'll rack them all up, I'm sure. And she has a book coming out later this year as well. How did she inspire this story?
So the story, I began brainstorming and writing this story in 2011. It's before what happened, the tragedy that happened to Malala. And I knew I wanted to write a story about a girl that was in Pakistan because I feel Pakistan is very misunderstood. There's all these negative, harmful stereotypes out there. And I wanted to write a story about Pakistan where I'm not going to sugarcoat anything, but I also want to show the other reality that people don't see, that there's community and there's family and there's love and there's all these other wonderful things. And so I was thinking about what was the story that I wanted to tell. And I already had this image of this girl, Amal. I already knew she lived in this village, that I wasn't sure what happened or what the problems were. I didn't know it was going to be even about indentured servitude at that point. I just always think about the character first. And then in 2012, when I read about what happened to Malala, and I started seeing all the attention that she was getting, very deservedly so, I started thinking about all the other children in Pakistan and around the world, but particularly in Pakistan in that moment, who don't get the spotlight. And there's so many. There was another girl on the bus with Malala that day who was also shot, but she doesn't normally get much news coverage. There's just so many other girls and boys who do so much. There was a boy in, I believe it was in the Peshawar region of Pakistan, not a few years ago, who stopped a suicide bomber by giving his own life to stop the suicide bomber, and he saved his entire school by doing that. He did make a little blip in the news, but we don't know his name. I mean, there's so many kids, there's so many young people who shouldn't have to, but who do stand up and speak, truth to power. And so I just started thinking about that and how it's important for children to not only see someone as brave and inspiring as Malala to be inspired by, but to also know that even if we don't make those headlines, we can still create a great deal of change, and it's still important. And so that began my journey. So Malala inspired it because she got a headline, and I wanted to write about the kids that don't get the headlines.
Yeah, and who, other than those acts of violence that would be headline grabbing, Amal's acts of resistance are small but mighty. And I think that is the great message that I received as a reader of this book, is that you don't have to be, speaking in front of the Nobel committee, that you can commit small acts of resistance or...
Yeah, and I think after the election, that's one thing that's really been driven home to me is act locally, because that's where you have the most impact. You want to go up to, Washington, but the impact you're going to have talking to your city council they're going to listen to you in a way that they'll listen because you live there, and that's where you can affect the change. So
the cover is amazing too.
It really is. For this one, Lindsay Andrews at Penguin, she, I believe, got in touch with the illustrator. Her name is Shazal Malik. She's an illustrator who lives in Pakistan, and she had seen her work online and on Instagram and loved it. And so they shared with me the illustrator, and they're like, what do you think of her work? What do you think about her for the cover? So I loved her work. And so then she read the book, and she gave us about 7 to 10 sketches of different cover possibilities, and all of us unanimously loved this one. And then she sent us it was just the hands and a rough image, and then I think she sent us, after we picked this particular cover, she sent us like 20 different versions of it, like how it could look, like the background, what the pictures would be. And so we got to like narrow it down through there. But I love this cover so much, because once you've read the book, you see that it's just all there in her hands. And I love that henna is such a traditional Pakistani and Indian decoration that women wear for weddings and holidays. And so I love that they incorporated, that, but they also incorporated so much more. Like the wrists have the rose vines, and in the book, her mother grows roses. And then when she's captured, she also has roses in the garden there. And so I just love all the subtle hints. I feel like after you read the book, you can go back and look at the cover as a piece of art. And, I just love it.
All of the symbols that are a part of the story appear.
Exactly. And I love talking about covers, because I had really not much to do with it. It's all Shazal and Penguin collaborating on what it's going to look like. And I get to like pick, I get to do the fun part of going, I like that one. And, I just get to boast about Shazal Malik's work, because she's brilliant.
Well, you did have something to do with it, because it was very much inspired by your
that's true. That's true. That's a good point.
So it's kind of, ekphrastic artwork. You are also a founding member of We Need Diverse Books.
Yes.
How did you get involved with that movement that's now a nonprofit organization?
You know, sometimes just the stars align. I guess it was just one of those things. I had recently sold my book, Written in the Stars, and I was really excited. And I started Googling what it's like to be an author. What is it like to get published? What every new author probably does. And as I was researching and reading, I came across an article by Ellen O. She showed statistics of books published every year. How many are published by people of color? How many do well? How many don't do well? And I went on Twitter and I found her on Twitter and just wanted to thank her for the articles and how it made me think. And I happened to just stumble in while she was having a Twitter conversation with Melinda Lowe, another author, about this very issue. And so we all just started talking about, why is it like this? Why is it that people of color just don't have the same opportunities as to get their books as successful? What's the reason behind it? And so from there, other people started joining in on the conversation, and we were like, let's take this offline. It seems like there's a lot of people that are passionate about this issue. Let's take it offline. Let's all exchange email addresses and let's talk about what we could do. And so in our email conversations, we're like, let's make a hashtag just to bring awareness about this issue. And we did, and we had no idea that it was going to go viral. It was viral for, I believe, 2 to 3 days. It was one of the #1 trending hashtags around the world. BookCon invited us to attend and have a last minute panel there. And we thought nobody would come because we were just a hashtag movement, we thought no one really knows. No one knew who I was then. I hadn't even had a book out yet. All right, we'll do this panel. No one's going to come. But the room was packed. They had to turn people away. And so when we saw that reaction at BookCon, we were like, this seems like something that's really striking a chord with a lot of people. Maybe it shouldn't just be a hashtag. Maybe we should take this momentum and try to do more to affect tangible change. And so that's how, from a hashtag, an organization was born.
Wow. It's really, really important work too.
Yeah, it's been amazing to watch their growth. I'm no longer on the executive committee. I had a baby, and I just couldn't do it all. So I stepped back, but it's incredible. Like, they have a grant for marginalized authors that want to get published who may need a little extra. And Angie Thomas, who wrote The Hate You Give, was one of the first recipients of the Walter Grant. We have a Walter Dean Myers Award. There's internships that we give, publishing internships for people who want to go into publishing but can't afford the New York rents, and to go there to do those internships. We award grants to aspiring publishers.
This is your second book.
Yes.
What lessons did you learn from the first book that you're taking with you as you get ready to launch the second one?
It's a very different market now. Young adult is the teen market, and adults, because a lot of adults read young adult. And then the middle grade market is completely different because the kids are much younger. They can't buy the books themselves. They have to go through parents or go to a library. So I'm more interacting. Before I was interacting more with teen bloggers and teens, and now I'm interacting more with librarians and teachers. I was a former teacher, so it's a pleasure to do that. So this feels very much like a new debut for me because the market is different and everything does work a little different. But one thing that definitely is easier, the second book, is knowing and accepting that you don't have much control about what's going to happen. You just have to write the best book you can, and then you just have to see what will happen. And the first book, there's a lot more anxiety. Mm-hmm. With the second book, you truly understand there's not much you can do. It's just people are going to like it. People are going to talk about it, spread it through word of mouth, or they won't. And no matter what, you can't do anything about it. So you just have to go ahead and write your next book and focus on the things you can actually make an impact on.
Well, I liked on your website, you had a list of like 14 things, 14 facts about you. Yeah. And one of them was that you had 9 different jobs.
I did.
You mentioned earlier that you had been a teacher, but you were also a lawyer. Are you practicing?
No, I'm inactive. I still pay my Georgia bar dues, right, but I'm not active anymore. I think ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a teacher, and I wanted to be an author. Those were the two biggest things I wanted to be. But becoming an author and actually living as an author is not easy to do. And so I wrote, but I never wrote with the intention of getting published, because I was like, it's just impossible. The odds are so low. So, so I was like, well, I like to read. I like to write. So after I was a teacher for a couple of years, I thought, I think I want to take this love for reading and writing and maybe go to law school, because you do a lot of reading and writing in law school. And so I went to law school, and I did 2 years I was an Equal Justice Works Fellow with Atlanta Legal Aid, and I represented children with their education law issues with school. And I did that for 2 years, and then I found out I was having my son. I was pregnant with my son. And then I really had to think about what the future was going to look like, because if I was going to be a lawyer and a mother, I was never going to write. It just wasn't going to happen. And so I talked to my husband, and we were very fortunate that I could just say, okay, let's take some time away from working. I'm going to stay home with my son, and I'm going to write. And luckily that worked out. I got to write, and I was able to find an agent, and the book was eventually published. It's a lot of different careers, but I feel like the one career that I was always just yearning for was to be an author. And the great thing about writing for children is you get to do school visits and you get to work with children. So I still get to pull in from the teaching that I used to love to do. So I get to have the best of both worlds. I get to write books, and I get to do school visits.
And for those people who listen to the podcast and who are always looking for writing advice, what's the best piece of writing advice that you've gotten?
I think the best piece of writing advice I have is to not be afraid of starting over and over and over. It was a book I read, it was called The Writing Life by Annie Dillard, and she talked about that. She said, sometimes you write an entire first draft, and the reason that your work isn't selling or isn't improving is because you're just committed to that first draft and the way it's written. But she said, no, sometimes you just have to write that first draft to see the way you're going to go. It won't be the book that gets published. So she's like, sometimes you'll write 2 or 3 drafts, and then you have to be at peace with just throwing those away and maybe starting over. And so I think that's the biggest writing advice I've gotten, is that just because those first few versions you wrote are bad doesn't mean that the book will not ultimately happen. You just have to give it the time. It's art, and it requires revision and revision. And I think as somebody who gets impatient, I'm like, no, but I want to write it. I want to be done. And then you read these finished books like by Celeste Ng and, Emily Penn, and you're just like, these are such beautiful works of art. Why is my book so terrible right now? And you have to just have that patience of, they got there through revision and revision, and I'm going to get there through revision. I think the biggest advice I have is to be patient with your book. Be gentle with yourself as you write.
The book launch party for Amal Unbound happens tomorrow, Saturday, May 12th at 3 p.m. at Little Shop of Stories. And just to get us caught up on Metro Atlanta book events happening this weekend and into early next week, Acapella Books host actor, comedian, and producer Mike Epps at their shop on Saturday at 4 p.m. Epps will sign copies of his new book, Unsuccessful Thug. He's also going to allow photos with fans. However, you will have to purchase a copy of the book at Acapella to enter the signing line. Rick Bragg brings his latest book, The Best Cook in the World, to the Prince Avenue location of Avid Bookshop in Athens. That event starts at 6 p.m. on May 12th. On Monday, May 14th, Chef Edward Lee brings his new collection of essays to Atlanta. Lee spent 2 years on the road, visiting different restaurants and exploring our country's mashup of food cultures. The final dish is buttermilk graffiti, a chef's journey to discover America's new melting pot cuisine. The Monday night event at the Highland Inn Ballroom Lounge features food and a fundraiser for global growers. Tickets are $35 each and include a signed first edition copy of Buttermilk Graffiti, with a portion of the proceeds going to global growers. And on Wednesday, May 16th, the Margaret Mitchell House welcomes Paula McLean. The best-selling author of The Paris Wife returns to the subject of Ernest Hemingway in her new novel, Love and Ruin. The book is about Hemingway's passionate, stormy marriage to Martha Gellhorn, one of the greatest war correspondents of the 20th century. General admission is $10. The event starts at 7 p.m. Remember, when you can, support these local booksellers and the authors they're hosting by buying a copy of the book at the event. Thanks for listening to this episode. As always, you can find links to the people, books, and events mentioned in the podcast on our website at literaryatlanta.com. You can listen to episodes there or download them wherever you like to get your podcast. Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, or TuneIn. I'm Allison Law, your host. Until next time, take care and stay lit curious.